One of the things we've been doing at the Center on the Legal Profession over the last several years is bringing in young scholars at the beginning of their careers for a postdoctoral program. They usually stay for a couple of years and they work on projects that they bring with them, but we also work on projects together. Over the last couple of years, we've had a terrific postdoctoral student named John Bliss. He's a graduate of the JSP program at Berkeley. He's got a PhD in sociology as well as a law degree. And his project has been around the professional identity formulation of young lawyers. He's been doing a series of empirical research projects, not just in the United States, but also in China as well, to try to understand how lawyers come to think about themselves as lawyers and how their identity as lawyers fits together or doesn't fit together with other important parts of their identity. Could be their gender or their race or their sexual orientation or their religious identity or their political ideals. You may remember that we published part of John's research in an earlier issue of the practice, in an earlier year of the practice, I should say, which is linked to below, in which we looked at a very interesting exercise that he took students through to try to locate their identity as lawyers in a circle in relationship to other parts of their identities. This year, we picked up on another strand of John's research, which addresses one of the eternal issues in legal education, and particularly among law students, but also in the wider culture about how legal education is shaping or maybe shaping the career goals of lawyers. John calls this a paper on what he calls public interest drift. And many of you will be familiar with this thesis. The argument is that students come in with a very strong orientation towards doing public interest work of some kind, nonprofits, public interest law, government lawyering, and many of them end up leaving to go work in private law firms. And the theory has been that law school has been changing them in ways that sort of drive them away from this initial ideal of public service. John takes this idea very seriously, but he questions both some of the premises of this argument and also some of the results as shown through his own work with law students over the course of their legal careers. So some people have questioned this narrative by arguing they don't actually think law students come in with a strong commitment to public interest. They just say they have that commitment because it sounds good in law school applications or it makes them feel good about themselves. But in reality, they're simply as interested in material rewards or careers as anybody else. John actually finds that that's not true of the students who he's dealt with in the course of his research, that there is actually a commitment, at least among some students, to public interest, but it's much more ambiguous than the kind of standard narrative would lead one to believe. That is, it's not fixed in the students who come in that they know they want to do public interest, or conversely, that they know they want to do private practice, but they're just pretending to say they want to do public interest. It's much more ambiguous than that. And that's largely because students don't really know much about what the practice of law is really like and what it means really to be a public interest lawyer or to be a lawyer in private practice in a setting like a large law firm. So instead, what John finds is that students come in with this ambiguous idea, and they do enter into a law school culture in which, say, private practice and large law firms are very important, that's through recruiting and through student grapevine, and there's a lot of discussion about careers in the large law firm sector. Uh, but it's not true that that treatment in, for example, first year classes or even first year socialization leads students to abandon their initial commitment to public interest. Instead, what it does is it problematizes it by showing them that there's a much larger world out there, and then giving them an opportunity to interface with that world through, for example, the first year interview process. This process, in many ways, leaves many students more confused than ever about what it is that their ultimate career goals and orientation and the way in which being a lawyer fits in with other parts of their identity than they were when they came in. And that it's that confusion that often leads students who end up going into, let's say, the private sector to feel alienated about their choices, not convinced by their choices, but alienated by their choices, and therefore alienated to their emerging roles as lawyers. And that whatever one thinks about private practice or public service, that level of alienation is not healthy for students who are trying to understand how to build successful and satisfying careers in the law. So having identified this much more complex and fluid set of ideas that students take about their careers, John then engages in some very, I think, interesting speculation about how we might intervene in that process in a way that would help students to understand their choices better and maybe to make better choices about where they want to go and what kinds of careers that they want to pursue. And he looks at a range of things, including more, for example, information about legal careers in the early stages of law school so that students can then, when they enter into the recruiting process, have a better sense of what that means. More open and honest discussion among students and between students and faculty members and students and alumni about how people not just get jobs but make careers that might encompass a number of different kinds of jobs, and a range of other, I think, very interesting suggestions about how we might intervene in the process. We think this is an issue that's going to be very important for not just for law students, but for young lawyers and senior lawyers seeking to recruit young lawyers into various kinds of legal organizations, and one that we hope to continue to build on in future issues of the practice as John continues to do his work, again, not just here in the United States, but he's also done similar work with Chinese law students about how they think about their identities. I hope that all of you will take a look at this latest issue of about John's work, that you'll take a look at the prior issue if you hadn't had a chance to do so. And I know that John would be very interested in hearing from anyone who would like to continue this discussion, and we've included his contact information at the bottom.